What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. So a lot of people are still trying to figure out what happened between Sony and Bluepoint, looking for all kinds of information to try to put together the puzzle pieces. Well, now new report and rumors are going around as to what Bluepoint was trying to pitch towards the end of their existence, and one game in particular, of course, set the internet off, but we're gonna go over that here today. Also, we are going to be talking about Resident Evil Requiem, as it's out tomorrow, but reviews went live yesterday, and we may have another Game of the Year contender, maybe early Game of the Year contender on our hands. And there was a recent update that was announced for the Xbox Series, but also the Xbox One, that might make that system more relevant than expected going forward. All that and more. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button. Helps out a ton. And if you're new here to the Spawn Wave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. And of course, members for the channel do get Newswave early. If you would like to learn more about that, click the join button or link in the description down below. And we're going to start today with PlayStation Plus essential games that have been announced for the month of March. And we can see this is over on PlayStation blog. These games will be available starting March 3rd. We have 2K25. So PGA Tour 2K25. I laugh because I do think any of the sports games that go in are kind of a wasted slot. As we know, many of them just depreciate heavily. Oh, I mean, very, very quickly. But I mean, hey, look, if you've been curious about PGA Tour, it's going into Essential and you can just give it a try. A good game here, though, Monster Hunter Rise, well, that's been on deep discount, is a very, very good game. And if you have not played it, it's certainly worth checking out. That one will also be on the PS4 alongside of the PS5. We have Slime Rancher 2 on the PS5. And then the Elder Scrolls Online Collection Gold Road, that's PS5 and PS4. So I'd say an okay month. Nothing crazy that really jumps off the page to me. I guess, if anything, I'd probably recommend Monster Hunter Rise. And it seems like they're really trying to push PGA Tour as like the big banner game. But the sports titles, just to me, don't really make that big of an impact in something like PlayStation Plus Essentials. Also, we have some unfortunate news for Full Circle, which is the developer behind Skate, the current live service revival of the franchise. And we can see this is over on their page, where they say, "We're reshaping Full Circle to better support Skate's long-term future and focus the team on the things that matter most to you and making those things great. These shifts mean making changes to our team structure, and some roles will be impacted. The teammates affected are talented colleagues and friends who help build the foundation of Skate." So basically, I mean, people are being laid off there. They're shrinking down, it seems like, the studio, and while they say they're shifting over to one that's more accommodating for their current goals going forward. I mean, the goal should be to get more people to play it and to build out this free-to-play live service game. But if you look online, people look at the Steam DB, like the current player count, it has just continued to drop and drop and drop, and it's, I mean, it's like 2% of what it was when it initially launched, hit that high peak of like 100 or so thousand people. It's like less than 2,000 people now most times. And it's unfortunate because I do think there was a path forward, at least for a more budget-constrained single-player experience for $50 or $60 with something like the Skate franchise that, yes, could also be, I'm sure, monetized in the single-player online but also offline method. And it's just, it seems like they really wanted to go live service to where they affected like everything about the game outside the gameplay. The gameplay is good, but the look of it does try to go in that way of Fortnite. Because I mean, I know it's like the running theme. It's like, oh, they're doing the Fortnite look. They definitely lean into more of that bright and cartoony kind of aesthetic, and it just didn't seem to me anyway to really get back to the look and the feel of what we had with some of the older Skate titles. But seems like they're going to press on. Still, to me, seems like an unfortunate situation because I just think a single player, but also with multiplayer, standard multiplayer game would have been better overall. Oh, and this was just a funny thing that I saw going around, as Jeff Grubb mentioned on his Game Mess Decides, the Polyphony had Gran Turismo 7 running on a Switch 2. I assume would be a Switch 2 dev kit. And people were just really confused as to why exactly. And to be honest, I'm not really sure. And again, this is just kind of like, oh, Jeff Grubb say, oh, he heard from someone that they were running it on there. And Polyphony also deals with a lot of the technology stuff within Sony for their releases with Gran Turismo. And it's possible they may have just been doing some internal research themselves on lower powered chips and their effects on maybe Gran Turismo 7, the next Gran Turismo. Just again, internal R&D. It wouldn't surprise me if that was the case. No, I don't think Gran Turismo 7 is going to the Switch 2. The way that they look at the Gran Turismo series now more than ever is simulation. And unfortunately for the Switch 2, they don't have analog triggers. And I do think that is a big sticking point for a simulation racing game on the level of like realism and what they're shooting for with something like Gran Turismo. But certainly they wouldn't mind just seeing, hey, how does this new Tegra chip that Nvidia and Nintendo came together to make, how does that run Gran Turismo? And what does that mean for the future when Sony may have a handheld? That's all I can really take away from this, because no, I don't think you're going to see this game pop up in a future Nintendo Direct. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with something that had the internet going absolutely crazy yesterday, as the original post exploded to almost 2 million views in like the length of maybe 7 or 8 hours. I mean, it was very, very quick. And this had to do with Bluepoint and Sony, with the situation that seems to be still ongoing, in the sense that I think people are really investigating this right now behind the scenes, trying to come up with the timeline of events and how we got to a position where Sony bought Bluepoint, 5 years ago, never released a game, and now they're being shut down in March. Well, this came way of Detective Seeds. Again, there's already all kinds of discussion back and forth on how reliable this information is. I do believe he's talking to some people at Bluepoint, but again, there's 70 people, for example, who are being impacted at Bluepoint. So even from there, parsing the information and figuring out what's correct, what's hearsay, like what did they hear from someone, heard from someone, it's a whole thing there. But one game did come up, and I was worried it would, because I knew it would cause a whole commotion online, and indeed it has. So let's just take a look. Again, this is a very, very long write-up here that I'll have linked down below in the sources. There was one part that I really wanted to hone in on here for this segment, and it has to do with those pitched games that Bluepoint was making to Sony in their final year or so. And we can see. Well, we'll start with the first point here. They pitched Jak and Daxter Remake, Resistance Remake, Shadow of the Colossus Remaster, so going back to the PS4 version of the game, bringing it to PS5, updating the graphics, of course, because you used to have more capable hardware, but also adding 4 to 6 new bosses. And from what I remember, there were cut bosses from the original Shadow of the Colossus, so that actually would have been kind of cool to see them maybe try to reimagine or even bring those up from, like, maybe they do have access to some of the original cut content and files that they could recreate and put into a new version of the game. And also mentioning with several pulled from the original PS2 content. So that would have been, I think that would have been really cool to see. A Jak and Daxter Remake, I mean, we have it right now on the PS5 and there are ways to access it, sure. Resistance, though, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. It's a game from the PS3 era that's still stuck on the PS3 era because you have to stream them. And I know Sony with the idea of Resistance seems to give Sony cold feet because they probably don't know how that would be received. Would it sell well? I still think it's worth a shot. I'm a little surprised that they didn't even say Infamous in here. Like, that's, to me, that seems obvious, unless Sucker Punch is like, no one's touching Infamous. I don't know. But then we get on to the big one that sticks out, of course, Bloodborne Remake. Now, he says it was again pitched, and apparently this is because back after they did Demon's Souls, they were looking around about Bloodborne, and there's a whole thing. There has to be something going on right now between Sony and FromSoft, because that is the only explanation as to why you do not want to print money with a Bloodborne remake from Bluepoint. Everything was that, like, the stars were aligned, I feel like, for this, coming off of, again, I thought a very strong release with Demon's Souls. People have been desperately they're falling over themselves, trying to give Sony $70 for Bloodborne. And you know what? Sony could go, hey, we'll see how serious you are, it's $80. And you know what would happen? People would fall over themselves probably to give Sony $80 for Bloodborne. They would, like a remake, okay? But he says a small portion of the team worked on it for 2 to 3 months, but Sony pulled the plug. It was never officially greenlit, but they were deep in negotiations, and Bluepoint thought they would make it. And again, this blew up online. People are going crazy over the idea that Bloodborne may have actually been somewhat in the works and then shot down. And people are also weighing in on how legitimate some of this info is. Like, for example, Jason Schreier, people were mentioning that he shot all of this down, but not the case. It seemed like he was talking about a tweet from a few days ago that was from a whole other person, and it got kind of mixed in here. For example, over on Reset Era, Jason Schreier does say, hold on, I didn't deny that Bluepoint pitched Bloodborne. I denied that specific tweet, which was saying something about how they were in the middle of making Bloodborne until Sony forced them to stop for a games as a service title. And Apparently that's something that Detective Seas has not actually said. Even the idea of a Bloodborne games as a service title was being thrown around, and that apparently wasn't correct. So it's that situation where almost telephone, people are just copy and pasting, moving things around, and it's kind of being lost in translation, if you will, with this. But here's the part. Okay, so we also have like Nate, who says some of this aligns with what I've heard, some of it doesn't. So there's a lot of information in that thread, and I think that's the biggest piece of caution here is there's almost too much information. But the thing that I was really curious about is where Sony was with Bluepoint in that last year when they were pitching projects. And I think that's going to be the most relevant information because it gives us an idea as to where current day Sony is. Sony from 2021, when they bought Bluepoint, is just different than the Sony we have now, just outright. It's been almost 5 years now, but things have already changed throughout the entire PlayStation 5 generation. So if they did indeed pitch Bloodborne, get to work on Bloodborne, and it ended up being a whole thing, but also pitch some of these other projects, and Sony was like, no, and then morale falls apart, and then Bluepoint's like, whatever, I guess we're done, and then they go their separate ways, where it really was Sony shuts them down. That's not great, and that does make me once again look at Hermen Hulst, instead of just Jim Ryan, who was there back then, obviously 5 years ago, working to get that deal done and buy Bluepoint, because then it comes down to Hermen Hulst managing Bluepoint, and this doesn't exactly paint a great picture for him. But let me know what you guys think about some of this information down below. I think we are still going to get more and more information from Jason Schreier, for example. I'm sure looking around behind the scenes, trying to figure some things out, and that will be a big report if that does indeed get published on something like Bloomberg, because, Jason Schreier is going to look around quite a bit, coming to the table with 10, 12, 13 sources. And then I think we'll get a bit more information even on top of what we have here. Next up, let's talk about Resident Evil Requiem, which is out tomorrow. I'm very excited to check this game out. I'll be picking it up on the PlayStation 5 and on the Switch too. I want to see how this game holds up there, as a lot of people right now are saying it's a very, very good version on the Switch too, and that's going to be, I think, one of the more impressive games from a technical standpoint for the system, especially with it running at 60 frames per second, and in portable mode, that's going to be really, really cool to see in action. But let's take a look at some of the reviews here, and we can see, we'll go across the different platforms. The system that did get the most reviews was the PlayStation 5, 116 critic reviews at the time of this recording, and 88. The Xbox Series X with 10 reviews at a 92, the PC at 17 reviews at a 91, and the Switch 2, 12 reviews at a 90. I mean, that's impressive stuff all the way around. Let's take a look at some of the reviews, though. This on the PlayStation 5 from Game Rant says, Resident Evil Requiem's gripping story and intoxicating gameplay blend are wrapped up in a perfectly polished experience with eye-popping graphics and a blood-pumping soundtrack. Resident Evil Requiem is a horror game masterpiece and one of the best games Capcom has ever made. Wow, okay. Level Up says a masterful fusion of classic survival horror and high-intensity action. Resident Evil Requiem seamlessly blends Grace's methodical survival stealth with Leon's explosive combat and a cohesive vision that respects the franchise's legacy while boldly shaping its future. Moving over to the opposite end of the spectrum, the lowest score is a 60 from Region Free. Says heavy on nostalgia and fan service with the occasional violent delight thrown in. Requiem is a mostly fun Resident Evil title that still feels like a step down from its predecessor. And I will say, looking around, that does seem to be the outlier, because I see many people that I'll follow on social media who are really into Resident Evil, and they're like, this is like one of the best Resident Evil games I've played since 4 when that first dropped, and that was massive. I mean, if you look right now on the review scores, I think this is the highest rated one apart from Resident Evil 4. So Capcom, I mean, we've already talked about how they're firing on all cylinders. They're just continuing that push now with Resident Evil Requiem. And for them, I'm sure they're happy to see it's selling out. The physical copy, I was looking around online, on Amazon, it's just gone. On Walmart, not in stock. Best Buy, check back later. Target, temporarily out of stock. I'm like, wow, it's like that right now with Resident Evil. You know what? I think Capcom might have something here with this Resident Evil franchise. Don't quote me on it, but we'll find out as we go along, and they maybe do a few more of these. Well, hey, Resident Evil Requiem, I'm excited. That was the thing I was curious about. How will it perform on the Switch 2? People seem to say it's doing really well. Okay, how will the jumping back and forth between Grace and Leon, how will that do since their gameplay style seems so different? Nope, seems like they figured that out. What about playing through it multiple times? That's something that's actually good with? Yeah, Gene said he beat it 9 times already. So, sounds like Resident Evil to me. Very excited for tomorrow. I'll be picking this one up and starting it immediately. Next up, let's talk about Xbox with a recent update that kind of went under the radar a bit, but I think it's quite interesting for people who maybe have an Xbox One that's just sitting in a closet somewhere because you have an Xbox Series or you're just not really playing the Xbox One much anymore. Take a look at this. This is over on their website for news.xbox.com. And scrolling a little bit down here, you can see they say Xbox Cloud gaming on Xbox consoles is leveling up. We're now rolling out up to 1440p higher bitrate streaming for Xbox Game Pass Ultimate members, delivering sharp visuals and more responsive gameplay across supported titles and regions. This upgrade is beginning to roll out on Xbox Series X, S, Xbox One X, and Xbox One S consoles. Interesting. So we've already kind of talked about the concept of the last generation Xbox One, well, not really the VCR, but like the One S and the One X, potentially still being relevant throughout this generation and maybe even into the future because it can act as a cloud box or a streaming box at that point. And if we do believe that the streaming technology will get better and better and better, and now you're seeing 1440p with higher bitrate, the responsiveness is the thing that is still a bit of a sticking point. For me, especially when I look at certain games, like I'm playing Neo 3 right now, I couldn't really even play that thing on the Portal. It was kind of a struggle because if it did drop connection even a little bit, it got a little spotty and it wasn't as responsive to dodge, so I'm mostly doing ninja form. It was over for some of the tougher bosses in Endgame that I'm really playing right now. So, but if you're playing RPGs or even I would say some third-person action adventure games, I think it would work quite well. And this to me is if you're someone who has an Xbox One S or an Xbox One X that's not really used at all, but maybe you're thinking, oh, I could use that in a spare bedroom. I could use that just in the bedroom or living room or wherever else, right? And stream those games. It does at least add some functionality to a system that you figure would be left behind in the last generation. And of course, it can still play for the Xbox One S and One X, Blu-ray discs, the whole thing there. But the One S was the one that jumped out. I'm like, oh, okay, they're going to stream 1440p through it. And remember, I do think they will push for 4K streaming at some point, and that will certainly make the One X and One S quite relevant, maybe even going into whatever Microsoft has planned for next generation. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about an awesome collection that got announced yesterday. And this hit me with the massive amounts of nostalgia because I thought back to playing one game in particular on my Super Nintendo over and over and over again. But let's take a look. This is over on Limited Run Games website. Marvel Maximum Collection. So okay, get this, all right? They have the X-Men arcade game, which is fine, but it also has online multiplayer support for up to 6 players, including rollback netcode, so that's pretty cool. Captain America and the Avengers, it's the arcade, the Mega, and 8-bit version. Spider-Man and Venom Maximum Carnage, that was the one right there. I saw Maximum Carnage, immediately got hit with the nostalgia of the red cartridge with Carnage on the front, but that's for the Super and the Mega version there. And that's awesome. Separation Anxiety, that's also there. I didn't have as much experience with that. It was mostly just Maximum Carnage and that red Super Nintendo cartridge. Me and my brothers played that game constantly back in the day, which back then you had a handful of games or cartridges for your Super Nintendo, and you just played them over and over again throughout the year until you got to your birthday or your or Christmas or something, and you got a new system or new games. This was one of those games that I would say for a good year and a half, I just constantly played next to something like Link to the Past. We also have Spider-Man and X-Men Arcade's Revenge. Silver Surfer, for some reason. That game was so hard. If this is the one I'm thinking of, the 8-bit one, that was tough. They also have all kinds of other fun stuff in there. A music player, the archive, so you can look through all kinds of high-resolution scans for original box art, instruction manuals, even some old advertisements. Integrated cheats menu, rewind and save states, which I'm sure will be abused like crazy, and some of those games are pretty difficult. And then also display options, so you can do the modern pixels or do CRT and scan lines. No word as to when it's coming out, just coming soon, and they have it up for wish lists and stuff. But this looks like a lot of fun. And I'm going to be checking it out. Yeah, mostly because of the nostalgia factor, but also it'd be kind of cool just to have a collection like this to jump across a few games that I certainly didn't have a chance to play back then or just not that familiar with, but absolutely I will be playing a ton of Maximum Carnage, so I'm looking forward to it. And before we go to the comment of the day, we'll take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday, where I ask, the reviews are in, are you picking up Resident Evil Requiem? Okay, 22% just no, not interested, but then the rest, 42% say yes, 36% say maybe later if there's a sale. And look, I mean, the sale's already kind of on. If you look at on the Switch 2, they have this collection of games. I'm trying to remember exactly what the collection's called, but it's Resident Evil 7, 8, and then 9 Requiem. And I think it's $90 for the pack, which is really, really good because this is $30 each. Otherwise, though, I mean, Resident Evil, yes, it does go on sale pretty quickly, and they do bundle deals like that on other platforms as well. So if you kind of just hang out, or you're not like super into Resident Evil, but you do like an occasional good action horror game from time to time, I'm sure maybe even by the end of the year on a Cyber Monday or Black Friday, maybe mark down 20 or 30% or something. But this is a game that I have to see what happens, because I'm also already figuring it's going to be spoiled like crazy anyway online when everyone gets a hold of it. They were already trying to spoil me and everyone else online like this last week. So I got to at least see what we're dealing with here when it comes to the story. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day, as you're seeing here. This is from Michael, who says, Wolverine's date was absolutely dropped to put out the Bluepoint fire. Yeah, I see that take going around as well. And maybe, I mean, you feel like they would have this thing planned out well in advance for how big the game is probably going to be, but certainly the license handling between them and Marvel, there's a lot of stuff that has to be approved well in advance, because even Disney would probably want to know when this stuff is being announced, whether it's a state of play or even just the release date, because they also want to take advantage of some of the marketing on their side. You can see how excited people were and the amount of impressions going around and the discussion around Wolverine. So everyone involved would want to be aware of that and not necessarily rush it. But you're right, the timing isn't great for like, oh, Bluepoint's gone or going away, and then here's Wolverine. Because if they had that Wolverine announcement indeed planned out weeks or a month or so ago, and okay, we're going to do this to close out February, and then Herman Hulst has to show and be like, yeah, we're closing Bluepoint. Then following, because again, it looks that way. I can't necessarily rule out that idea, but I would probably lean more on the side of Disney and Sony and everyone working together to try to make sure that's set up weeks or even a month or so in advance. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today. If you have missed yesterday's Newswave, I'll leave it up here in a card. Or maybe you wanted to check out me buying and ordering some old retro games from GameStop just to see what they shipped to me. Oh, I did a whole video on that, and you can check it out below. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.